World leaders and surviving Second World War veterans are in France for the climax of 3 days of ceremonies marking the 80th anniversary of the D-Day landings. It was just before 6:30 in the morning, the 6th of June 1944, that more than 150,000 troops from Britain, America, Canada and France began what became the world's largest ever seaborne invasion. After swarming onto the Normandy beaches, they had to fight their way past heavy German defenses to begin the liberation of France from the Nazis. World leaders have been attending events to mark the anniversary, but there was one notable exception. Russia, a key ally in the Second World War, was not represented. President Putin wasn't invited, but the president of Ukraine, Volodymyr Zelensky, was there alongside his counterparts. At the British Normandy Memorial near Gold Beach, King Charles paid tribute to those who took part in the assault. The king laid a wreath remembering their service and sacrifice. His words were echoed by the French President Emmanuel Macron. At a parallel service, the Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau said all should be done to preserve the hard-won freedom. And US President Joe Biden addressed the crowd.
History tells us freedom is not free. If you want to know the price of freedom, come here to Normandy. Come to Normandy and look. Go to the other cemeteries in Europe where our fallen heroes rest. Go back home to Arlington Cemetery. Tomorrow, I will pay respects at Pointe du Hoc. Go there as well and remember, the price of unchecked tyranny is the blood of the young and the brave. In their generation, in their hour of trial, the Allied forces of D-Day did their duty. Now the question for us is, in our hour of trial, will we do ours? We're living in a time when democracy is more at risk across the world than any point since the end of World War II, since these beaches were stormed in 1944. Now we have to ask ourselves, will we stand against tyranny, against evil, against crushing brutality of the iron fist? Will we stand for freedom? Will we defend democracy? Will we stand together? My answer is yes, and only can be yes. We're not far off from the time when the last living voices of those who fought and bled on D-Day will no longer be with us. So we have a special obligation. We cannot let what happened here be lost in the silence of the years to come. We must remember it, must honor it, and live it. And we must remember the fact that they were heroes here that day does not absolve us from what we have to do today. Democracy is never guaranteed. Every generation must preserve it, defend it, and fight for it. That's the test of the ages. In memory of those who fought here, died here, literally saved the world here. Let us be worthy of their sacrifice. Let us be the generation that when history is written about our time, in 10, 20, 30, 50, 80 years from now, it'll be said, when the moment came, we met the moment. We stood strong. Our alliances were made stronger. We saved democracy in our time as well.
President Biden there speaking at the D-Day commemoration ceremony in France. Well, for more on this, let's cross live to London and speak with Arise correspondent Lape Olarinoye. Good to see you, Lape. Just give us a sense of the ceremonies that have been taking place along that French coast commemorating D-Day.
Well, Charles, there's a lot going on, and rightly so. It's been 80 years since D-Day, since a year before what led to the end of the Second World War. Now, of course, here on the shores in Europe, particularly in France, where that military operation took place all those years ago, there's said to be several commemorations, from military flyovers to services to wreaths being laid at military memorial sites, all with, of course, very much present day and iconic figures in history like King Charles, who has been at one of those sites, at the British Memorial Site in Normandy, with his wife Queen Camilla, where he laid a wreath in his full military regalia, which we saw earlier in those pictures. Of course, at the same time, his son, who will be the next king, the Prince of Wales, Prince William, was also with the President of Canada, Prime Minister of Canada, Justin Trudeau, at a neighbouring beach site as well, where they were also hosting commemorations there as well. We know that President Macron has been quite busy as well. He's been seeing different people and seeing different leaders who are all in his country at the same time. So a really busy time for him as well. But it's really interesting here as well that aside from the world leaders who have all taken the center stage at these Memorial Day celebrations. Oh, by the way, it's worth noting here to include that President Volodymyr Zelensky of Ukraine is also present there. He received a standing ovation. But away from the world leaders, veterans, by the way, who are now in their 90s and their early hundreds, remarkable, are also present. In fact, 5 years ago, Charles, there were said to be over 100 of them who visited these sites. This year, there's only 25. In fact, one of those US veterans died on the way to France. And so it's just very much telling that, you know, these veterans who were present at a very historical moment will at some point no longer be here. And we can see that in the sheer number of them who are still able to attend the celebration. So it's been an interesting day, you know, celebrated by world leaders, but also those who were instrumental into that victory that happened all those years ago, those veterans who are dotted all around France at this moment, also commemorating a very historical day.
Indeed, Lape, and that last comment you made there about the aging veterans makes the whole commemoration considerably more poignant. But these commemorations have taken place in the past. I mean, but does it seem to have taken on a greater geopolitical significance and resonance this year? Because, I mean, you mentioned Vladimir Zelensky, there's war, and of course there was the liberation of Europe. They're on everyone's mind today, past and present, and the present being, of course, Ukraine.
Absolutely. That's a great question you asked there, Charles. I mean, all those years ago, Russia was, you know, on the right side of, you know, this celebration, if you like. This time around, 80 years later, which again is very significant of why these celebrations are taking place on this scale, very much a landmark celebration. But also the fact that the geopolitical tension in Europe at the moment, Russia and the conflict with Ukraine, has made it all the more important. I mean, President Biden definitely indicated that in his speech and talked about Russian aggression. Of course, has shifted a lot more to in comparison to where it was 80 years ago. And this has become very much indicative of the way in which the climate in Europe currently is, the political climate that is. And the fact that Mr. Zelensky attended also is very much significant of how well he's positioned in Europe now. He's, of course, on the side of the French, the Canadians, the British and the Americans, but actually Russia remains isolated. And that, of course, was very much highlighted today, where the absence of Russia was very obvious. And of course, the continuing war in Ukraine, aggravated by Russia, becomes even more obvious than ever before on a day like this. So yes, the geopolitical tension is more so drawn to on a day like this. And we can see that just across the celebrations happening today.
Well, absolutely. And just turning our attention, Lape, to the importance of D-Day itself. I mean, how crucial was it to the course of the Second World War? How much of a death blow was it for Nazi Germany?
I mean, it's one of the most crucial moments in history, especially in European history. I mean, this happened a year before 1945, when the Second World War came to an end, and it's said that it was the most intense, the most significant military seaborne operation in all time, and that says a lot about it. The coordination of the attack, and in stopping the advancement of Nazi Germany. We know that it's significant today because of where these celebrations are happening on the beaches and the shores across France. The British Navy was positioned there, as well as the American, the Canadian, including the French, who all attacked the Nazi German fleet, which led, of course, to the destruction of the Nazi Germany Empire. And of course, the days in which we can celebrate today. Many people died that day, so the rest of us and generations to come could live. In fact, those that died was a staggering number. Over 4,000 people died specifically from the British fleet, and there's said to be more of a casualty from French civilians as a result of the Allied forces bombing and raids as well. So there was a lot of death, there was a lot of destruction, but in typical wartime history, this was almost a necessary destruction to get to a greater end. And we've seen that repetitively repeated in history books, in education, and of course, in events like this D-Day Memorial, where we're reminded of, many people won't be alive or don't remember these scenes, but they're reminded of how important it was in the advancement and of modern day Europe. So it's a very significant time in history for the Europeans, and specifically for the modern day Europe that we live in, or that I live in now. And so it's significant to talk about it, and that is why there is so much of a significance around the celebration.
And that is why it is important to keep on remembering. Lape, thank you very much indeed. Lape Olarinoye is Arise correspondent. She was talking to me there from London.